Welcome back to The Narrative. I'm your storyteller, Callistra Farrier. We turn our attention to the island of Nevis, where the recently passed Special Sustainability Zone Act has sparked both optimism and outrage. The government says it will usher in a new era of sustainable investment and economic opportunity, but critics argue it could erode public control of land, limit transparency, and even threaten the island's autonomy. Joining me now on The Narrative is Dr. Patricia Bartlett, Deputy Political Leader of the Nevis Reformation Party, who has been a leading voice opposing the Special Sustainability Zone initiative. Dr. Bartlett, welcome to The Narrative.
Thank you, Callistra. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's good to have you on. For those who are not aware of what the SSZ or the Special Sustainability Zone is, let's start there. Can you explain what exactly this Special Sustainability Zone entails and what's being proposed? And also, under whose authority does it fall?
Well, it falls under the authority of the Prime Minister of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. The Special Sustainability Zone Authorization Act came into being at the federal parliament, the level of the federal parliament that's in St. Kitts. And so on the 11th of August, that was introduced there for the second and the third reading and was passed into law. Now it has implications for the people in Nevis in particular, because we suspect highly that it was driven by the developers who are now seeking to establish a safe zone in Nevis, to promote their political ideology. These people have been identified as being libertarians, and I don't know how much the audience would know about libertarians, but just in a nutshell, these are people who essentially are asking for or advocating for a space that they can control, where everyone is free to do as they feel like, with limited laws applied to them. And so we are saying not in Nevis, because they have put their sights on an area in Nevis, in the south part of Nevis. And what they're proposing to do is to settle on at least 6 square miles of Nevis. Now Nevis is only 36 square miles. And so we're talking about 1/6 of Nevis. These people want as an exclusive enclave, so that they can do what they wish to do without really any oversight from our people on the other side. We're talking about crypto billionaires and people in that league. So essentially what they're seeking to do is to create 2 societies on just 36 square miles, where you have the rich would be isolated in an area where just us who are left on the other side to occupy what is left, because essentially most of our lands have been used up for tourism. And so as a people, it means that we are driven further and further, tighter and tighter, closer to the mountain. Now we live in a volcanic island, and it is an active volcano we have no place to run to. So the south part of Nevis, which is essentially the furthest part away from the mountains, that is the portion that they have eyed, that they want to occupy without government oversight. We have said no to this, the NRP.
But let me ask you, without government oversight, what is it in the act that ensures that they can operate without government oversight? Is this going to be, is the act allowing a state within a state? Is that...
Well, essentially, that is what it is boiling down to be. Now, I am not a legal person. I'm not a lawyer, but our legal, minds here have opined that it's exactly what the law sets out to create. Now, we have reason to believe that this law was created, or the legislation was created by a group, by the developer themselves. So they've had a group, a legal group, working on this framework for their existence. And so essentially, this law was brought to our parliament, was dropped in the lap of the AG, and it was brought to parliament. And if you were to read it, even as a layperson, after I read it, it was alarming to me, because the provisions in this act that call for these people to create their own space, their own security, their own mechanism for resolving disputes. These things were alarming. And of course, we were talking about these people getting the permission, or the act was silent on what exactly we were ceding to these people, apart from lands. But we have to take it in the context of what these developers, the public statements that they've made, that made it even more alarming for most of us. Because the act in itself is one thing, but when you look at what they have been promoting out there in the public space, they have not been shy about saying what their intentions are. And they have telegraphed, as a matter of fact, they've had it in essays, that their intention is to buy lands from a government that would allow sovereign or individual sovereign, behavior. And so, if they are already, telegraphing to us that that is the intention, we can't continue to play dumb or blind to these things. We must react.
So, as your legal advisors for the Reformation Party, and as you've looked at the bill, the issue of whether or not a crime is committed, I am guessing here that some of the workers who would end up in this special sustainability zone working would be nationals of St. Kitts and Nevis. Is there anything in it? You talked about their own dispute resolution mechanism. What happens if a crime is committed? A woman goes to clean somebody's house in this zone and gets raped, or a child is attacked by a pedophile in this zone. How does that particular criminal dispute get settled if the act calls for? Or does it not go into the realm of the criminal in terms of how much power they have to dispute their own resolutions?
Well, they have not been specific about it, but essentially what our lawyers are saying is the intent is, it seems to be subliminal, but it is there that they would be controlling their space as it relates to things like policing. It's specifically in the act, it speaks to the military. Now, on the line that they had, the military, that the central government or the government of St. Kitts and Nevis would have exclusive control over the military. That same line was long enough and had space, so they could have included the police, but it was omitted. There was no reference made directly to the police involvement in that zone. And so but
St. Kitts and Nevis does not really have a military, do you?
Well, we have a semblance of. We have a few guys running around.
Okay, so you have a paramilitary force, as we do here in Grenada and some of the islands too. Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, that's how you categorize them. But yes, we have a defense force. It speaks to defense force.
A defense force, paramilitary. Yeah. Okay. And so when this was how is this being sold to the public by the government, by the Drew administration? How was this brought to the public? How was it introduced and explained to Nevisians in particular?
Well, after the NRP called out what was going on, then they became very defensive. Dr. Drew himself has tried to recoil from it, and he's trying to wash his hands of his involvement. But it came to the federal parliament. That is where this law got its legitimacy from. And so he is trying to remove himself as far away as he can. And he's saying that in St. Kitts, that the law really is a needless thing, but it's a St. Kitts needless law. So I don't know how he can make that claim. But essentially on Nevis, though, the premier himself, who has been the one who's been at the forefront. And if you didn't know and you were to tune in to one of his interactions with the public, you would think that he was the PRO for Destiny and not the premier of Nevis, because he has been pushing this thing in the self-interest. Well, as most of us think it's really about self-interest, because he has much to gain from this zone being created as it relates to his family and their involvement in the whole process. And so he is out there pushing it, and of course, he is just highlighting for particularly the young people. He seems to be targeting the young people as the demographic that he thinks could sway this whole argument. I don't think they can, but that is his push. And he's making the claim that Destiny is likely to produce all these jobs. And so he's not telling them exactly what the jobs are, but he's trying to put these trinkets out, trying to attract the young people to support this thing without really understanding fully what is going on. And at the same time, when you ask questions about the developers, where are they? Why aren't they the ones coming forward to let us know firsthand what their intentions are, and how is it they're going to play into the whole scheme of things in terms of how they're going to be integrated in our socio and economic space? And we're not getting the opportunity to do that because the Premier has, for some reason, installed himself in the middle as the go-between. And so he's acting in the interest of the Destiny developers, as well as, we don't think sufficiently enough, in the interest of NEVIS. And so there's just this level of discomfort that we have with him trying to push the Destiny project without the Destiny people having a say, because they can always come later and say they did not say. And they've been very careful about what they put out. They have come out to refute some claims that have been made and out there in the public domain as it relates to what our liability is likely to be if there are issues related to the stalling of the project. If the project stalls for whatever reason and we are at fault, we are understanding that St. Kitts Nevis would be held liable for $23 billion, as opposed to if the project is stalled because of the fault of the developer, then we are likely to just receive $75 million. Now you look at that disparity and you're like, well, who has been negotiating on behalf of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis? Because that doesn't seem fair for a country with a GDP of just $2.3 billion a year, you know? And so to put us in jeopardy for that kind of money doesn't seem logical, but yet still they're pressing forward and they're not providing the answers that people are asking for. Anytime you ask a question that goes to the fundamentals of the project, you get stonewalled.
And so Premier Brantley and supporters of the project, they're saying, as you said, it would bring jobs, housing, tourism, infrastructure, and whatever else they're promising for this project Destiny, as you said. Will this be viable? Because now you're talking about, you know, whether the project fails or whether it succeeds, and who's liable to pay compensation for anything that goes wrong there. But is this project a viable project? From your review, do those promises hold up under scrutiny, that Destiny can successfully be developed and these promised jobs can actually happen? The other issues of contention notwithstanding.
Right. But you see, the fundamental problem here is that we have not been able to see the development agreement. We don't know what is being promised. What we are hearing sometimes seems a bit contradictory. If you speak to the Premier, he has one version. The Deputy Premier probably would have something different to say. And then you have this compared to what the developers are willing to say at this point in time. Now, these are these developers, and the major developer here is a gentleman, a crypto billionaire by the name of Jansen. And we don't know that he has a track record of developing at least no development that we can point to in this whole wide world that could say that Jansen has been successfully associated with this development. And so we don't know what experience he has in terms of being a developer. And so I think a lot of questions have been asked as it relates to the due diligence that went into the principles, because it's not just him. We understand that there may be another 59, because the thing is out there that 60 of these persons are waiting to start rolling with their monies. And so we are not confident.
And so this is under your citizenship by investment program.
Well, and that is something that we are now hearing afterwards, that this project is likely to be associated with the Citizen by Investment. Now, the Citizen by Investment program, initially, remember we were making a lot of money, and we understand we're in trouble now. The bottom has fallen out in 2024, and so people are scampering out. But this thing is just now coming to the fore, that this project might be associated with it. Because when the Premier spoke, his version was that these people would have to buy, or at least pay for the processing fee for Citizens by Investment, whether they wanted to be citizens or not. So it seems like it was just a play to get some monies into the coffers of the government. And so later now we are hearing that these residents or these settlers will in fact be CBI, citizens. And that is alarming, because we're talking about 10,000 or probably even more, because the Premier has come to say that it could be from 7 to 10,000 persons. Now we know that the principals, once they apply for citizenship, now they can bring their whole family. If they had an extended family of, let's say, 4 or 5, then they could bring those family members with them. So we're talking about even more, potentially even more than 10,000 persons who would be settlers in that area. And that is alarming, because these people would be allowed to vote. And as a matter of fact, they've had posts out there in social media where these people, as if we don't exist, Callista, they are saying, there was one post that said, interestingly enough, guys, this is a good place to move to, because if 15,000 of us were to move to St. Kitts Nevis, that has a population of just 50,000 persons, I think they would have said 58,000 persons, but it's 52 we have now. And so they're proposing, if they were to move here, 15,000 libertarians, then they can get their citizenship, they can get their passport, they can get the right to vote, and they can even run in our elections. So you see right away how the dynamics on this small island can change.
Run in the elections, and we're looking at 10,000, with 10,000 of them, and the entourage that can very well overpower the indigenous voters of St. Kitts and Nevis. And certainly Nevis, and you spoke earlier, you talked earlier about political moves being involved in this. Is this what you were referring to? The fact that they can come with a tremendous amount of political power as citizens with the right to vote?
Yes, and they've already been wielding their power before they even fully entrenched here, because they're the ones who brought this law. Imagine investors already dictating our laws.
So are you absolutely sure? Are you absolutely sure, without any doubt, that the law was drafted and created by the people who are associated with Destiny, and not by your Attorney General's office and your legal draftsman on St. Kitts and Nevis?
I don't have any reasonable doubts. I don't have any reasonable doubts at all, because there's a lawyer that is associated with the Destiny group. She identified herself, I think, as a Grenadian, and she's Dawn Decote, or I'm not quite familiar with the pronunciation of her second name.
Dawn Decoto, yes.
Coteau.
Yes, Dawn Decoto, yeah.
My French, pardon my French, because I say en club. But anyway, yes, but this person has been, well, she was literally doing cartwheels after the legislation was passed in the federal house here, saying, well, this is the first step, and she said that shortly the development agreements would be signed. So it was mission accomplished, because for her it was years, and she had it posted on social media. She's like, for years they've been working on this legislation. She was very specific in making reference to the legislation that was brought to the House in St. Kitts Nevis on the 11th. Well, she misquoted it. Well, she mistakenly said the 10th of August. but it was actually on the 11th of August that
Okay.
it was brought to Parliament here. They have taken credit for
For being the drafters of the legislation and handing it to the government for passage in your House of Assembly. I see. So there's the issue of sovereignty and governance here. What some of the concerns that you have. How are you going to push back against this? How does this get stopped? Because in my experience, these huge deep pockets, when they come with their projects, once the government has stepped forward, no matter how hard the people march and no matter how loud they shout, unless a regime changes with the power to stop things, it usually just barrels forward. What's the next move for those who oppose this project?
Well, our initial move was to make sure that our people are aware, to get them energized, to make sure that they understood what was at stake here. And we continue that effort. The NRP, we don't have any resident constitutional lawyers, so we have been sending out feelers trying to find out, and there are others who are now getting involved because we've had opinions, maybe not official opinions, but we've had opinions from people like King Charles Wilkin, who is a King's Counsel, Dwyer Astafan. Those kind of voices are now getting involved in the whole thing, and people are essentially, as lawyers, they are essentially asking for repeal. Well, we have been asking for repeal ever since we understood what was going on. NRP has been out there agitating and asking for repeal of this law. And now that we have heavy hitting voices who are joining the fight, we appreciate that and we want to encourage more persons. And we understand that, we have had some solid advice, and we have been advised that it is likely that this could go to the Privy Council if they do not back off, and it is likely that a challenge on constitutional basis could in fact prevail. And so that is what essentially we're banking on if it goes that far. We are hoping that we would have made enough noise. We're having a rally tomorrow night. That is Friday evening in Brownhill area. That is the area that is almost the epicenter of this thing as it relates to SSC and where it is supposed to be located. And so we're going to continue to make as much noise as we can, and we're going to leave it to the legal luminaries to do their part, because we have already said to our people that this is not a political fight. Unfortunately, NRP has had to carry it this far. We were hoping that we could have at least be able to hand off to some civic organization and be able to step back and support as much as we can. And not because, as you're well aware, in these islands, most politics has really fractured, the relationship between a lot of people, and you have this divide between, and the point of the matter is you have a lot of people who would have supported the government but for this particular issue. They are siding not with us, but they are siding against the SSC. And so we want to be able to have a wide enough umbrella, but we can't get the top of that because it means that some of these people would rather stay on the outside and get wet than come under the umbrella, even though they want to be associated with the no to the SSC. And so we want to be able to create enough space that everybody to find their rightful place in this fight, because the fight cannot be solely a political fight.
Certainly. And the legislation appears to grant, and we talked about it earlier, the developer broad exemptions and control over land use decisions, law and order. As you look at this and pushback happens, what would you say are the most alarming aspects of this act that you have come across?
There are two aspects, I think. The fact that we were going to cede so much of the powers of the government to some entity that it would not be controlled by us, that in itself was alarming. And then, of course, it gave broad powers, unprecedented broad powers to the Prime Minister. If he was so minded, he can go ahead and sign an agreement and disregard all of the other provisions in the Act itself, because or even any other, because there's a clause in there, a provision in there, that the Prime Minister could, even though there are laws, there are treaties, and any other law that preceded this particular piece of legislation, he could still act in defiance of any of those. That is what this law was crafted to give the Prime Minister. So all they need to do is just to compromise the Prime Minister. And so that was a very alarming for me and for us.
And then I'm thinking, if they are citizenship by investment, they become citizens by investment and have the right to vote, but then they not under any sort of police or security, national security jurisdiction, having their own state within the state, but still being allowed to vote in that other state. That seems a bit contradictory as well, and not well thought out, and may, you know, apart from the act sounding like it violates a lot of issues of sovereignty, that we're looking at two different things here. The police can't tell me what to do, but I still have the full rights as a citizen in national elections.
Correct. And not only that, these people have, their intention is not necessarily to stay within the zone. They have been putting out there in social media that ultimately what they would like to do is to take over the country and make it a libertarian type country, a free society, the first of its kind. So ultimately that is what they are aiming for. And we can't play blind and dumb. So we have to react. You know, it's not just about this staying within the confines of that 6 square miles. The intention is to branch out. And this is not the first time. History would, you know, if we were to delve deep enough into history and what happened in the United States, you know, we would recognize that when these groups come, they come with thinking that they have an inherent right, because money for them, you know, can buy whatever they need in this world, and people who have less are not worth anything. Because these discussions that are happening in the public domain, so insensitive. It's as if people in St. Kitts and Nevis don't exist, or we can't read, or if we can read, we can't understand, or if we can read and understand, then they don't care how we feel about it. And so they think that they can just project these kind of narratives out there, that they would just come into St. Kitts and Nevis. And they were discussing this since in January, 10 months ago. We have these posts on social media that people are openly discussing moving to specifically St. Kitts and Nevis.
And still it's moving forward. So the court may be the last line of defense on this for the areas of concern under this plan.
Well, maybe. It is not true to say that it is moving forward. Right now, they're spinning. They have gotten to a roadblock and they're spinning, because I don't think that they anticipated that we would be this enlightened this quick. And so their intention really was to sneak this law in, get the blessings of the federal government, then get their agreements, their development agreements processed in quick order. But because we found out and we started to agitate early and put up this resistance and calling out to everybody who would listen, I think right now they're in a spin mode. And so the Premier himself has been the one at the forefront who goes out and spins everything. And so they can't move forward until they get the development agreements. And they're saying that they're at the 37th iteration of these agreements. So I don't know what is the sticking point, because they're the ones who came up with the law, they're the ones who came up with the agreements. And so I would imagine that right now they're in spin mode. They're not in moving forward mode, and we're hoping that we'll be able to stop them just where they're at, and they won't be able to move any further.
And you're saying Prime Minister Terence Drew has been distancing himself now, after the House of Assembly has passed this act, is distancing himself from the whole project?
Correct. That's what he's saying. He has been on record as saying, oh, that is me, this thing, don't get me involved in that, you know. But he's the one who ultimately has the authority, because that is what they sought when they went to Parliament. They went to Parliament to seek the authority for the Prime Minister himself to sign off on these zones. And so for him now to step back and say, don't get him involved in this is laughable, at least. And so I don't know how he's going to extricate himself from this process, because he's now coming under heavy fire in St. Kitts. Initially, the Premier was under fire here in Nevis, but now that St. Kitts people understand that this thing may not be limited to just Nevis, because they understand the implications. If these people come in and their purpose or their goal is to take over St. Kitts and Nevis, we have said to people in St. Kitts, in Nevis, our house might be on fire, so wet yours. And I think that right now they're paying attention, and they've pulled out the hose and they've started to wet down theirs. And so we welcome the activities that are going on in St. Kitts now. You have the political parties down there getting engaged. You have the Chamber of Industry and Commerce has gotten engaged. The Bar Association and those other civic groups are now fully engaged, in the discussions. And so I think Dr. Drew is in a rock and a hard place, because I do understand why he would have been excited about trying to facilitate this project, because it meant 10,000 CBI passports. Last year, I think he managed to do just $281 million in processing fees, compared to $669 million that he would have done in 2022. And so I understand the need or the urgency for him to try and find an alternate source. So I'm not so sure that I'm in a position that I want to, at this point, say that I feel sorry for Dr. Drew. But he has been warned.
And finally, let me ask you, Dr. Bartlett, the environment, that's also a big issue. Nevis is a small island, and if you have 10,000 people moving in there with an entire area, I mean, is there any sort of, it's the sustainability zone, so does that word there speak for itself in terms of how they would develop this? Or do you have concerns about the environmental burden on the island of Nevis if this happens?
But of course, you're talking about the water source. They have not indicated to us that they're willing to invest in or even entertain the thought of doing desalination. What we are hearing is that in that area, we have wells and we have springs in that area. And so it seems like they want to be able to tap into our water source. And that is something that is quite alarming for all of us, because wars have been fought over water. And we don't want it to get to that point, because they're the ones who have the deep pockets. And so we cannot share that resource with them. It is a no-no. Likewise, they've indicated that they are responsible for providing at least 70% of their electricity needs on the SSZ, which not going to happen. Not likely to happen, because they're now talking about our geothermal resource, which is still at the point that we're not sure where it's going, because the federal government took that over when the Premier couldn't find the financial resources, to move that project forward, to find an alternative source of energy for our people, or a renewable source of energy. And so that has been kicked over to the federal government, and it is likely, what these people are saying now, it is likely that they might become involved in the geothermal exploration and the production of energy from geothermal on Nevis. No, we can't get these people coming and take control of that resource as well. The land resource, as scarce as it is, they're asking us to share that, and now they want to take over, it seems. The language that the Premier is using is that they would like to partner with us. No, they're going to partner with us, but we don't have any financial backing in this thing. They're the ones who have the monies to spend, so who is likely to be the dominant partner here? And so I don't think that we want to entertain that either.
And even geothermal energy comes with its own risks to groundwater sources and things like that. It does come with its own environmental risks. And like I said before, Nevis is a small island, so that does, I'm wondering here how concerned the environmentalists are when they hear plans of that nature. But Dr. Bartlett, we've come to the end of our time together, but I just want to ask you, what is the message that you have for Nevisians who feel uncertain or powerless about where this project is heading? given the deep pockets and loud voices of Destiny and its people?
Well, the message I have for all people is that we should not sit back and just accept what the Premier would want to feed us. We have had enough of that. We need to invest the time and the energy in defending what is ours. Nevis is ours. We should not be ceding not even 1/2 of a square mile to these people. And we need to get up off our laurels. We need to get engaged in the fight. We need to protest if we must, and we will. And we need to do whatever we can to preserve Nevis for Nevisians today and Nevisians to come.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patricia Bartlett. Thanks for being on, Deputy Political Leader of the Nevis Reformation Party. And thank you for joining us and for sharing your perspective on this very critical issue. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
And the debate over the special sustainability zone touches on the very heart of how small islands pursue development, balancing economic growth with sovereignty, transparency, and the public good. We here at The Narrative will continue to follow this story closely as it unfolds on Nevis. I'm Callistra Farrier, your storyteller. The Narrative continues in a moment.